All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Domrat. I am the Adult Programs Coordinator at the VMFA. Today, we are doing the virtual 3 and 30 for June with my colleague, Karen Getty, the Senior Tour Services Coordinator. And with that, I will pass it off to Karen.
Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate being invited to participate in this program today. So my name is Karen Getty, and as Katie mentioned, I work in the Tour Services Department here, which is the part of education. I work with our volunteer tour guides and a couple of other things here at the museum. But today I'm going to be leading you on this journey through art, only 30 minutes, so a little short. We're going to focus on 3 objects in our permanent collection. And our theme today is, what does freedom look like? So all 3 of these works are centered on the theme of freedom. So today's tour, just as I mentioned, it's going to cover 3 works from our permanent collection, all centered on the theme of freedom. We're going to take approximately 30 minutes. And the reason why I've chosen this theme for our 3 and 30 today is because we are in the month of June, and I wanted to recognize the upcoming holiday, Juneteenth, which of course was just recently made a national holiday, and that commemorates the date June 19th, 1865. That was 2 years approximately after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but it took those 2 years for the word to travel down all the way to Galveston, Texas, to the enslaved communities there. So at that point, the news had reached the far depths of the South, and so it was sort of the unofficial ending. And since then, that date has been celebrated by African-American communities. And now we can all take part in remembering that special day and kind of celebrating that freedom. So in celebration of this holiday, we're going to be thinking about this theme moving forward. So what does freedom look like? That's a difficult question, and there really is no one answer. As we're going to see with all 3 of these works, each artist is sort of grappling with freedom in a different context. So we're going to be examining each work and thinking about, what kind of freedom is this work dealing with? So without any further ado, this is our object number 1. And I did put the, label, title, date, so that, that gives some things away right off the bat. But without even looking at the title or the artist or anything, we're going to get into that information. For a moment, I want to invite everybody just to take some time and look at the image. I know it's not the same when you don't have the real work of art in front of you, but we might be able to see details that you perhaps wouldn't be able to see in the galleries. This painting can be a little dark in person when you're seeing it. So you do have to kind of get up close and really kind of squint to make sure you're picking up all of the details. And when I was in the galleries on Tuesday with my group talking about this work, I invited them to just share things they were seeing, right? So just to start from the basics, we're looking at this painting, and there's a horse, looks like it's galloping, looks like it's moving kind of fast. And that doesn't, I don't have to have a degree to determine that. None of us do, right? These are things that you could, come to the conclusion of just on your own in the galleries looking at an object. So just based on the way the horse's body is shown, the tail waving out in the wind, we can tell that this horse is moving at a fast speed. I see some people on the horse, and it looks like, from at first glance, it looks like 3 people. I see a young child sitting on the front. I'm guessing it's a little boy. based on what I see. I see an older man, an adult male in the middle, and then behind him riding, I think side saddle is what I believe to be a female figure based on just what I see from her facial characteristics, her hairstyle, and the dress. So again, these are all based on just my observations. I'm kind of just sharing what's in this image. There's nothing much in terms of the landscape. We don't really know just from looking where they are. It looks like they're outdoors. We can assume there's a horse, so we hope it's outdoors. It looks like there might be a break of sunlight through the clouds in the far off distance. Looks like maybe a hazy sky, possibly some mountains off in the distance. Those are some of the things that we can ascertain just from looking. And when we look a little harder, if it's hard to notice, and let me actually go to the next slide because I got it a little more of a detail, but you can see that the woman is holding something. And when you look really closely, you'll notice it's another child. It's another small child, probably a baby. So just kind of recapping on where we are. We've got this, a lot of people assume, they leap to the conclusion that this is a family. And I think that's a pretty safe conclusion to come to, right? We see an adult male and female and small children, and they're all together. They look like a unit. And so we assume they're a family. So based on what we can see, they're Black. They're riding a horse. And not to mention their clothes, all of those things kind of give us an idea of the time period, right? So we can say it's the mid 1800s. And when we gather all of those details, we can maybe assume that these people, if we're talking about American art in the 1800s, people of color, they were most likely enslaved. So again, all of these details about this work are just based on our initial observations. Another thing that people notice a lot with this is that the woman is looking back. It's a very telling gesture. You know, when we look behind us, it's usually we're looking to see if somebody's following us. It sort of gives us an idea that maybe she's nervous. And all of that together mixed with the high rate of speed the horse is riding, the fact that they're all together on one horse, that isn't exactly the safest thing. So all of these things kind of tell us that they're running from something. They're scared. Another thing is they're under the cover of darkness, whether it's early morning, in the middle of the night, whatever it is, they're under the cover of darkness. So all of these things really give us an idea about this work. So I'll tell you a little bit about the artist who painted this. The artist's name was Eastman Johnson. He was a white artist working during the mid 1800s, during the time of the Civil War. And as many artists did during war times, especially before cameras, many artists would travel with some of the troops to document battles and just what was taking place during those fights and engagements. And Eastman Johnson did that. He actually traveled with McClellan's troops in 1862. And it was when he was with McClellan's troops that he actually witnessed this scene, according to Eastman Johnson. In fact, sorry, I'm going to skip up a little, but on the back of the canvas is this inscription from Eastman Johnson: "A veritable incident in the Civil War seen by myself at Centerville on this morning of McClellan's advance towards Manassas, March 2nd, 1862, signed Eastman Johnson." So it was something that he actually saw. And, you know, based on Johnson, he says that he was asleep in his tent. I think the story goes something like this. And, you know, it was quiet and the sun was barely coming up and he heard a, a gallop of a horse, and he just peeked out of his tent, and right when he did that, this is what he saw run right in front of him. And apparently he was just so moved by what he had seen that, he made a point to sketch it, and he later finished the painting in his studio. He did 2 copies of this painting. The other version is at the Brooklyn Museum, and their version doesn't have the inscription on the back. So that's something to note. And it's not a painting that was ever exhibited really during his lifetime, from what we know. And I mean, scholars suggest that that had to do with the controversial nature of what he was capturing, which, now that we have some of these facts in with our observations, we can kind of put it all together, and we can assume that this was a family or a unit of fugitive slaves. They were enslaved people, probably in the Virginia area, and they were fleeing. They were seeking freedom, literal freedom from captivity. So it's a very moving piece. It's a very emotional. I definitely encourage you to go and check it out. It's in our Mellon collection. It's a part of our Mellon American Galleries, Mellon American Collection, and it's up with the British sporting art all the way in the back on the 3rd floor. So if you get around to it, I highly recommend taking a look at this amazing work. So moving along, and sorry, I wanted to show you another example. This is not in our collection, but another example, a painting by Eastman Johnson. And he was more known for genre scenes like this, images that just showed kind of daily life. He did focus a lot on African Americans as subject matter, but typically activities like this, what the painting we just looked at, is definitely out of the ordinary for Eastman Johnson. So it's a very special work. So again, the first work, we were talking about freedom from captivity. Now, the next image we're going to see, I can almost imagine that the subjects in this painting could be the descendants of the subjects in our first painting. And they were struggling not for their freedom from literal captivity, but freedom from other cruelties in the world that took the place of slavery. So our next object is this one. And again, you can see the title and the artist and the date and all that. When I'm in the galleries, that's something I don't typically share right off the bat, because I like to just look at the image before we let any text or, words, ideas start to get in our minds, which can affect what we see, how we see. I like to really pay attention to the image first. So again, I invite you to look. And if I was with you in person, I would ask you to share some things that you are seeing. And I'll go ahead and just talk about some of what we're looking at. So we see sort of an outdoor scene. It's at night, again, another, under the cover of darkness maybe, but we do see some light shining through the clouds. It's almost like a supernatural kind of light. Somebody said in my group the other day, almost like an alien invasion, they said. And it does have a supernatural feel to it. Checking my time here. Okay. And I see some birds in the sky. There's actually 3. They're hard to see, but there are 3 birds flying around in the sky. We've got some trees, and I see a little town, some buildings in the back. You see the lights on, maybe some smoke coming up from chimneys. And then in the foreground here, I see a group of people walking away from the town, it looks like. Some folks in the group observed that the the people, some of them looked maybe a little tired. They were kind of leaning on each other. A couple here in the foreground, the gentleman is pointing towards the sky, like just as to like show his partner something. He's referencing something. So that's kind of the scene that we are looking at. And, you know, the observations that were made, aside from people look a little tired, the light is supernatural, like an alien invasion. Somebody else said there's a religious feel to this image. And it's hard to verbalize what that is, but it's absolutely there. Now, for anybody who's familiar with Christian symbolism, you probably will hone in on those three birds that are flying in the sky. So in the Christian faith, three is a very prominent symbol. It symbolizes the Holy Trinity, and, you know, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so a lot of times when something's shown in threes, especially birds, it's a symbol of the Holy Trinity. So that comes into play somehow in this work. So again, we're going to try to just put some of this together. Again, we're focusing on this theme of freedom. And you know that I mentioned these people could perhaps be the descendants of the first group of the subjects that we saw in the first painting. So to play on that idea a little bit more, this painting was done approximately 60 or so years after the last one. It was painted in 1927. And it's by an artist named Archibald Motley. Archibald Motley was sort of, he's very much associated with the Harlem Renaissance often. And I'll show you a picture of the artist here. Archibald Motley was mostly known for these paintings like I've shown over here on the right, none of which are in our collection, unfortunately. But these are examples of some other works that he did. He was very well known for portraying the jazz scene, and he was very big on African-American identity and showcasing some of the best of what African-American culture had to offer to combat the negative stereotypes that were so prevalent in the visual arts, in pop culture, and everywhere during his lifetime. So a lot of artists during, excuse me, a lot of African-American artists, especially during the Harlem Renaissance, that was a lot of what their goal was, to represent a new, quote unquote, the new Negro, which was the name of the movement at the time, New Negro. It later became known as the Harlem Renaissance, but it was all about reshaping the identity of Black Americans. So with this work, Motley is, it's almost like a romanticized scene, but what he is referencing is something very real. He is referencing the Great Migration, which was a time period that's not set in stone, but approximately from 1910 to 1930, when the African-American population increased by roughly 40% in northern states, specifically in big metropolis areas like Harlem, New York, like Detroit, Philadelphia, things like that. So there was a huge influx of African Americans moving to northern states at this time. So why was that? Well, it was, again, to seek freedom. And it wasn't about freedom from captivity, literal this time. It was freedom from Jim Crow laws, Jim Crow economy, Jim Crow cruelties like lynching and things like that. At this time, European immigration had started to slow down a little. There were job openings in factories. There was more racial tolerance for the most part. Up north, there was more opportunities for housing. So for all of those reasons, African Americans were going to those places, including Archibald Motley and his family. They ended up in Chicago. He was a Chicago-based artist. He actually studied at the Art Institute for Chicago. So with this painting, he is referencing, like I said, that Great Migration. Now, what is he showing? Is it a real scene? Is it a real group of people? No. Again, it's an imagined, romanticized sort of version of that time. He's showing this group of Black and brown people. They're walking away from this town and it's dark. We don't know why they're walking away. We don't know if that's their farm town, their agricultural hometown that they're leaving to make the long journey up north. We don't know if they're on their way and they stopped to seek shelter and food and were pushed away and they're going to the next town. We have no idea. You know, those are some fun narratives that we can imagine and bring to this image when we're looking at a work like this on our own. We can imagine those storylines. But what we do know is, you know, that Motley is suggesting that this migration, as scary and as daunting as it was also full of hope and the promise of a brighter future, a brighter tomorrow. And he's also suggesting in a way with these religious symbols that it's mandated by God, right? So there's that implication as well with the three birds and the beautiful light coming from the sky. So a lot going on here, but it's a beautiful, beautiful work. Okay, so first image, we were talking about literal freedom from captivity. In this last image, we're talking about freedom from Jim Crow laws. And in the last image, we're going to take a little bit of a different turn. We're going to talk about a contemporary work. It's not a painting. It's a three-dimensional object. So let's take a look. This is our last work. It's part of our 21st century collection. And this is what the artist refers to as a sound suit. Doesn't really have a title. The artist of this piece is Nick Cave. He's alive and well today, born in 1959. And I'll tell you a little bit about him in a moment. As with each object, I always want to encourage my group to look. I told the group in the galleries the other day that the average museum visitor spends about 7 seconds looking at objects. So we really want to encourage people to take some more time and look. There's a lot that you can uncover just from your own observations. So this piece, it's life-size, if not larger. You know, the actual piece goes way above the head. But it's amazing embroidery on this piece that covers the wearer's entire body. It is on a mannequin. He's even got socks on the mannequin that have beautiful embroidered designs. There's flowers and geometric shapes. And yeah, it's just this beautiful explosion of color and design and texture. And yeah, for me, I actually specialize in African art, traditional African art. And this piece always reminds me of masks that cover the entire body. So it's a fascinating piece. And the artist, Nick Cave, is a fascinating guy. So this is Nick Cave with some of his creations. He's actually trained as a dancer, based in New York, and he's also a visual artist. And Nick Cave in the early 90s was a young, Black man, and he was going through a lot at the time. He was struggling. And I think the whole country was struggling with what was happening in 1992 after the video of Rodney King being beaten by the police was released. And the LA riots were taking place, and it really had a huge effect on Nick Cave. as a young Black man. And he started to ask himself the question, how do I exist in a place that sees me as a threat? And one day he was out in the park, Central Park, I think, and he was just sitting around. He had been, very depressed and down. He was looking down at the ground, and he noticed a lot of twigs and branches and sticks that were just discarded all around his feet. And he started to connect with those objects. He felt, you've been cast aside, left here, devalued. And that's kind of how I feel. So he started to pick the sticks and the branches and the twigs up. And he started to put them together, affix them to like a sack or something. And before he knew it, he had a complete suit made of twigs and branches. And I'll show you this image over on the right. These two are examples of what those types of sound suits looked like, something made completely out of natural fibers and sticks and berries and branches and things like that. So he had this suit made out of sticks. He put it on and he realized that it makes noises. And, of course, remember, he's trained as a dancer. So there's this performance element already sort of working in his mind. But that's kind of how these objects began. He started making them to serve as protective armor, if you will. It was a way to hide. He could hide his race. He could hide his gender. He could hide his sexual preference. He could hide everything and protect himself from societal stereotypes and fears and what was being projected onto him. So what brings us to this piece, what we have in our collection, which is kind of a far cry from the twigs and branches. He has since, as he's grown, as he's matured, as he's lived his life, he has started to become more confident in himself. And over the years, he was able to attain the freedom from those societal stereotypes. And kind of, he had the freedom to creatively express himself in a confident way. So all of a sudden, the sound suits, instead of being protective armor, they turned into forms of creative expression. And, that's kind of how he looks at them now. And it's all about movement and dance and the visual. And yeah, so again, these objects kind of transitioned from seeking to hide behind to all of a sudden being free from those, those vulnerabilities, if you will, and kind of having that freedom to creatively express himself the way he wants to. So I can't believe it's 11:30 and I am finishing up basically. So again, the last object, freedom to creatively express oneself. So we have looked at 3 objects, all kind of based on this theme of freedom. They all deal with freedom in a different way. But kind of, they're all sort of grappling with how to represent this concept. And so I thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my talk and how I kind of pulled these objects together. I really hope you can come to the gallery soon, see them in person.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.